Welcome back to the Artifact Shortcast, where we do podcasts short so you don't have to listen to 2 hours of rambling on the same topic. Today's guest is a popular Gwent streamer, Swim, and we are going to be talking about everyone's favorite topic, RNG. Is it good or is it bad? But first, let's have a little bit of introduction, man. Swim, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Lance Under. It's good to be on.
Hey man, I'm really glad you could join us today. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, apart from the fact that you are that guy that builds all the quote-quote cancer decks in Gwent?
That's most of it. I have a background in card games. I've played, a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Gwent for the past 10 or so years of my life, and the best thing about card games, in my opinion, is deck building. I pride myself on being one of the more creative deck builders out there.
So today's topic is RNG. What's your take on this? I know there isn't a simple yes or no answer, so I'm just gonna let you talk about it.
I think there's absolutely a reason people hate RNG. I think that most of the time it's been done, it has had kind of pretty glaring flaws. I think that Hearthstone, particularly some of the older patches of Hearthstone, have had pretty bad problems with RNG that a lot of people have kind of keyed in on. But I think that there's kind of more to it than just how much RNG is in a game, I guess I would say.
So, do you want to elaborate on this?
Yeah, so for example, when I first started playing Dota 2, a game which I played for 4 or 5 years of my life almost exclusively, basically nothing else with my 20s, I was shocked how much RNG was in the game, right? Coming from like first-person shooters, I was amazed at like how such a highly competitive game could have so many RNG elements. Like what fights can be won or lost off of like PA or CK rolls, right?
Or random double
damage. Exactly, rune spawns. There's tons of elements, but when you have a game with such a high degree of complexity, it is a lot harder for those RNG elements to really dictate too much of the outcome of the game. Obviously, they still do sometimes, but I guess my main point is it's very important to consider not just the RNG, but kind of the skill ratio therein as well. And I think really part of the problem with Hearthstone wasn't so much that it had a lot of RNG, but just that it had that much RNG without so much player agency to balance it out, right?
So basically, we need RNG that can be accounted for.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, from what we've seen of Artifacts, obviously just from the gameplay footage that they've revealed, a lot of people are saying that there's going to be a ton of RNG in the game. I'm kind of... I really hope that there won't be too much, but I encourage people to be aware that it really does matter not just how much RNG is in the game, but really the ratio of skill to RNG. From what we've seen, there's a lot of player skill and agency as well, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, especially from what we have seen, right, with creep spawns being random. So if a creep randomly spawns in a lane and helps you tank an extra tower hit, then it could possibly decide games that way. I think there was also a concern with the secret shop, because initially we thought there were going to be 3 items offered from your item deck, but in the end it was found out that it was only 1 item from your item deck, making the variance pretty scary. And what if I don't draw my blink dagger? What's the plan then, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just keep in mind, guys, like there's not so much we can actually like infer with great accuracy about Artifact, but very specifically, I just think it's important to go in with an open mind and not get too turned off by RNG. If it comes out and if RNG ends up being a really big problem, then we'll all be in for a big disappointment, I guess. But I think it's too early to make that call at this point, and I think there's kind of a few reasons for that. Specifically, one of the other things I wanted to bring up was an interview that Richard Garfield, the creator of this game, did, where he kind of talked about the different degrees of RNG and the kind of like different kinds of games there are. Basically, there's games with low skill and low RNG, like something like tic-tac-toe. There's games with high skill and low RNG, like chess. Games with high skill and high RNG, like poker. And then games with low skill and high RNG, like Hearthstone. Right?
Damn, you are going hard. Well, the punching bag of this podcast. I feel so bad.
You know what? Okay. To be honest, like new Hearthstone, like the last several patches have actually been a lot better. Yeah, I digress. But basically, Richard Garfield goes on to say, and keep in mind, this is the creator of Artifact and the co-creator of Magic the Gathering. He goes on to say that he really prefers game archetypes that have both a high degree of RNG and skill, right? Basically, if the ratio is the same, you'd rather have a higher amount of both of them. This leads to more complexity, more depth, more variance, and just like less of a flat experience in general. And I think that's exactly the kind of direction we can expect from Artifact.
All right. Okay. Now I want to, ask you, from the fun side of this question. I mean, we have the jargon with standard signs. You are a streamer. You got a pretty decent viewer base. 1 to 2,000 people watch your stream daily on Gwent. Which doesn't really, to be honest, doesn't have enough people watching. So you're one of the biggest ones already. So from a game that came from no RNG, almost no RNG, to discover mechanics and the create mechanics, the RNG mechanics. How has RNG affected you? I think this is specific to Gwent because Gwent is well known for being the no RNG game. And then they released a patch with some RNG elements added into it. They borrowed the create mechanic from Hearthstone, but then a lot of people got angry because these create pools were kind of big and they came with really swingy answers for different cards. And in a tactical game like Gwent, people say it had no space for it. But as a streamer, I know some people are okay with this RNG because you get high rolls, you get highlights. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually in the same talk. Actually, Richard Garfield went on to say that RNG shouldn't be added to a game with like a pre-existing player base. Like games should kind of start with maybe a medium or high amount of RNG and maybe get lower as time goes on. That's a pattern we've actually seen Hearthstone do to a degree, and that like adding RNG later on into a game can really like frustrate or infuriate your player base, and that's definitely an experience we've had with Gwent. But it also really matters like in what form that RNG is. Ultimately in Gwent it just didn't work out because of like the amount of like tech cards that you could pull from it, and that's something that I was actually kind of looking forward to, that aspect of RNG being added to the game, and I was personally wrong about that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think if they had limited the RNG, it would have been a lot better. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, let's hypothesize. Hypothesize. No, not the word for it.
Hypothesize.
Yeah, hypothesize. There we go. All right. So let's say we have let's theorize a little bit. Artifact. What kind of RNG would be good? Spawning, for example, good RNG would be card draw RNG, discover from a small pool.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it's hard to say. I will say regarding RNG, the most important RNG is okay. So people talk about good and bad kinds of RNG, right? This is something you've heard before if you browse various forums for game discussion talk like Reddit. People talk about like good forms and bad forms of RNG. A good form of RNG is one that allows the player early information, first of all, and second of all, the ability to kind of react to that information. A game that some of you may have heard of is Prismata, which utilizes this very well. There's not actual RNG in the gameplay elements, but in the setup, both you and your player get perfect information of the randomly rolled units that you both have access to. And that kind of dictates how the game then plays out based on the decisions you can make off of that, right? So the most important thing is getting that information early and being able to do something about it. If those are secured, the RNG is a lot less felt. The opposite of the spectrum is something like Ragnaros or Yogg-Saron, right? Which are just like the worst things ever because they happen at the end and there's pretty much nothing you can do about them if you don't have a deck that can really like power the opponent down before they can get to that point.
I've got a fun idea. What about Faceless Void's old backtrack? If there was what if there was a there was a unit that had a 25% chance to not die every time it got killed on the battlefield? That would resist damage.
Yeah,
that'll be fun. I don't know. That's bad RNG, right?
Yeah. Basically, stuff that just like happens like kind of after you make a decision instead of before you make a decision, typically, right? Like for example, in Magic the Gathering, the land system. I mean, sometimes you can get to the mid game. And if you're familiar with Magic, you can just draw like 5 lands in a row, right? And in the mid game when you need to draw units, and you can just lose, and that feels a lot worse because that's just something that happens and you don't have prior information to it. Of course, there's kind of reasons why specific in Magic design you kind of can't, but it just depends how the game is built. The rule of thumb: you want the information early and you want the ability to do something about it.
So ultimately it boils down to interaction, right? If I can see this bullshit coming, it's okay.
That's exactly right.
But I don't want to have half my cards blown up in my face because of high rolls that I can't do anything about. I mean, that's when someone Umas an Igni, right? that's exactly what happens. I think it's happened to you before.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, so this is actually something I kind of wanted to bring up as well. I think the possibility of kind of rare RNG elements, are actually not so bad. It needs to be something that does happen pretty rarely and not something very commonly at all. But something like an Uma into an Igni, Uma in Gwent is a card that basically just makes a random thing. It's not really competitive either. If somebody, you know, is willing to put a non-competitive card in their deck and happens to get like the 1% payoff with it, I think that's totally fine. Now, this is only fine because it's a rare case, right? And because typically, like, players that aren't looking to play competitively won't be running this card. Whereas the problem is, in, you know, many games like Hearthstone, we've seen cards like Ragnaros and Sylvanas and Yogg-Saron. I know I'm talking kind of older legacy Hearthstone, but we've seen those being too competitive in the past, right? I like the idea of, like, kind of crazy moments happening as long as they're rare and not seen commonly in a competitive environment. That's really the problem with some of the older RNG in Hearthstone.
Yeah, because ultimately, we are looking to make this an esport, and we can't have an esport if the game is just too bland and plays out the same every round. So having these crazy RNG elements allows, you know, some of the more light-hearted streamers to do memes. I mean, you yourself do lots of meme decks in Gwent, you know, the huge Ocvis, you know, like stuff like that can only happen when people are willing to take the chance and, alright, bank everything onto one card. If it gets countered, I lose. If it builds a lot of a streaming experience for the serious people, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know about you, but like, I mean, if I queue into, you know, somebody who's playing like a meta RNG card, like, I don't know, Ragnaros, I'm wailing on it as an example because more people are familiar. Yeah, well, yeah, I feel more people are familiar with Hearthstone than Gwent, but yeah, Slave Driver. When I roll into a person running Slave Driver, an RNG Gwent card for like the 5th time in a row, and they roll something really good, then I'm frustrated. But if I find the opponent like wacky enough to run Uma and they happen to get like the 1% Igni, I just have a big smile on my face. Like, yeah, I got screwed, but it's not gonna happen again for another like 200 games, and it's pretty funny. Like, as long as it's not actually like a presence in your, like, you know, this is something that makes you literally not want to queue again. It's not really damaging.
Man, I wish more streamers had your mentality. I know a lot of streamers that get bitter about RNG when actually they could have just avoided that outcome by playing around it.
I was going to say, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's the one takeaway here. As long as you as a player have the agency of being able to say, okay, I mean, yeah, maybe I got screwed by RNG, but if I had done this differently with information that I had access to at the time, I made a play that didn't give that RNG the option to happen, then it's not so bad. The problem is when you don't really have that choice, when your opponent just plays a very efficient unit that's very like efficient regardless of, you know, the RNG working out super well, and you know, you just have to eat it, right? Then that becomes the real problem with your game. Otherwise, we'll just have to see. I'm pretty excited for Artifact as a project, and I really hope that there's not too much bad RNG in it. We'll just have to see.
Alright then, let's hope this Faceless Void idea of mine doesn't happen. Besides, you seem to be taking this pretty well, actually.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I know I might seem like quite the optimist. I'm saying I don't really mind RNG. I want to make sure that people aren't necessarily turned off by it, but I don't like a lot of types of RNG, right? It really is important that it's done right, and then if it is, it's not so bad.
Alright, thanks for joining me, Swim. It will be a pleasure to have you back again for a future episode. You know, for now, we're just gonna wrap up RNG. It needs to be controlled. There's good and bad, but it's better to have both high RNG and high skill rather than to have less of both. Otherwise, it makes a bland game. But ultimately, we'll see what happens when it happens. Alright, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next episode. As always, remember to post below why you want a beta key, and also, what else you want to hear about, and who from. Write that below. Much love and Kappa.